Anybody who's ever read through the New Testament has been amazed at how similar the Gospels are and yet how different they are. We call the first three Gospels synoptic Gospels because they are so much alike. The fourth Gospel, John, is very unique. And one of the reasons why is that we have to remind ourselves, there's really just one Gospel. There are four descriptions of that one story, the one event of the Gospel. And John's very unique, and John has two emphases. He wants to emphasize Jesus, and he wants to emphasize faith. And so as we read through our story today, I want you to pay attention to those two themes. The theme of Jesus and the theme of our faith in Jesus. So we'll be in John, the 4th chapter, and we're going to begin in verse 46 and read through the end of the chapter. Therefore he came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And there was a royal official whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he had heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and was imploring him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you simply will not believe." The royal official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son lives." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started off. As he was now going down, his slaves met him, saying that his son was living. So he inquired of them the hour when he began to get better. Then they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him." So the father knew that it was at that hour in which Jesus said to him, "Your son lives." And he himself believed, and his whole household. This is again a second sign that Jesus performed when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. Here is the idea of faith and this man's faith in Jesus. And we look at Jesus as well. Faith. Faith is more than just what you think. It's not always a wise thing to believe everything you think. It's more than what you think. It is something you do, and then it becomes who we are, our being. Faith is something we become. And we see this gradual step-by-step growth in this man's faith, in his belief. And faith here is not just wishful thinking, and faith is not wishful thinking. It is not something we just hope for. It is evidence anchored in who Jesus is. So we see these two great topics, faith and Jesus, being explained to us in this story. Now here's this nobleman, this royal official. He has a series of dilemmas before him. First of all, he has to decide whether he should go from Capernaum to Cana to meet Jesus. Now that's about 20 miles, and it's going to be at least a 2-day trip. I mean, that's the least it's going to be, is a 2-day trip to get there, talk to Jesus, and then come back home. And so he's got to decide whether he should leave his wife and his son and go himself to Cana, or maybe he should grab a servant and ask him to go, or maybe a neighbor will go for him. But he decides he's going to go, and imagine he's thinking, what happens if my son dies? Well, I'm not even there. I mean, here is a man who has such desperation. And he has another dilemma in verse 50. Jesus says, "Go, your son as well." And he's got this dilemma. Do I take Jesus at his word and go? Or do I continue to implore Jesus to come to my house and insult him because he's told me already what I need to do? Now, the thing in this story is that a lot of the details aren't given to us. I mean, we've got to understand, though, that there's got to be a lot of desperation in this man. His son is dying. And have you ever had a loved one who's close to death? especially something like this, a child who you're responsible for. Here it is, his son. He's dying. He's desperate. He wants help. He needs help. And what you see here is this man's faith. Now, the first part of his faith, the first aspect of his faith is he has enough faith to seek Jesus. Now, granted, it's a faith that's out of desperation and it's out of necessity, but it is a faith. He believes that if he goes and sees Jesus and brings him home, something's going to change. And second, in verse 50, Jesus says, "Go, your son lives." This is another aspect of faith. Does he have enough faith to go home and trust Jesus at his word? And then in verse 53, it says, "So the father knew that it was at that hour in which Jesus said to him, 'Your son lives,' and he himself believed in his whole household." There's another kind of faith, a qualified, genuine faith. He saw what was going to happen. His faith was validated. The belief in Jesus was validated. And so you see this man's faith grow in this story. Now, there's a very similar story that Matthew tells, by the way. In Matthew, the 8th chapter, there's a similar story of a centurion person, a centurion man who comes to Jesus and says, "My servant is sick." And Jesus says, "Well, I'll come to your house and heal him." And the centurion says, "Well, wait, I'm not worthy of you to even come to my house. You just say the word and he'll be healed." And there are skeptics who say, "Well, look, that's the same story. They just got the details wrong." And this is another aspect of the Bible where there's contradictions. Well, there's no contradictions here. There's obviously two different stories. We have two different men. One's a nobleman. One's a centurion. One's a Jew. One's a Gentile. One has a servant who's sick. One has a son who is sick. There's so many differences in this story. And here you had the centurion say, "Just say the word and my servant will be well." One of the things I think is interesting about Matthew 8 is Matthew 8 focuses on what would it take to amaze Jesus? I mean, the creator of the universe. I mean, we get amazed at the sunsets and the sunrises, and we get amazed at all the beautiful sights that we see around us. Jesus made all those. He created all those. And so, here what would it take to amaze him? He's amazed at this man's faith. And so that story is about Jesus' response to this man's faith. Here in our story, in John the 4th chapter, it's all about this nobleman's faith. Look at his faith grow. And there's a growth in faith that we see here. In verse 48, Jesus said, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you simply will not believe." What would it take for you to believe? Do you need to see a miracle for you to believe? There was an atheist philosophy professor in a college that when his freshman class came in, the first thing he said was, "You would be a fool to believe in God." He says, "If there is a God, then when I drop this piece of chalk, God should be able to stop it from hitting the floor." And then he drops the piece of chalk, and of course it hits the floor and shatters. And I've just proven to you that there is no God, and you'd be foolish to believe in him. Well, in that particular case, there was a pretty sharp Christian kid in there, and he stood up and he says, "I don't exist. And I'm going to prove to you I don't exist." And he handed his friend a piece of chalk and he says, "If I exist, when this guy drops that piece of chalk, I should be able to stop it." And so he told the kid to let go of the piece of chalk, and he did. And he let the chalk hit the floor and it shattered. He says, "Well, look at there. The chalk shattered. I therefore don't exist. You'd be a fool to believe that I existed." I wish I was that clever as this kid was to think of something like that. But sometimes we think we need these knockout arguments. We need to see something just so amazing to actually believe in God. We need to have some kind of clever rebuttal or the ability to argue or the ability to debate. And none of us need that at all. You know, when Peter tells us to be able to give a response to why we believe, he's not telling us we have to give a rebuttal to every argument that we see. We have to answer every question that's asked of us. He's just saying you need to know yourself why you believe. You need to be able to tell people why you believe. It might be because the Bible tells me so, or because I believe in God. It doesn't have to be an elaborate explanation, but you should at least know why you're a Christian, why you believe. And so we think that we need these knockout reasons for why we believe. And when we talk to others, we think, wow, we just need to have some kind of clever rebuttal. But what we need is to rethink what we should be telling people. All we need to tell people is enough to plant a seed in their mind, a seed of faith. All we need to do is cultivate the soil just a little bit. All we need to do is be ambassadors of goodwill. You know, in the previous chapter, in chapter 3, verse 36 and following, Jesus says something interesting in this regard. He says, already he who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for eternal life, so that he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. For in this case the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have not entered into their labor. Sometimes all we need to do is plant a little seed. All we need to do is cultivate the soil and allow it to grow, allow it to mature. And sometimes we're allowed to come and reap what somebody else has sown. You know, oftentimes I'll preach a sermon, and somebody will come forward and they want to be baptized. They want to become a Christian. And I could pat myself on the back and say, man, I did a pretty good job. That was a pretty good sermon. This guy responded. And it's easy to forget that this guy has gone through Bible class for years. This guy has many friends who are Christians who've spoken to him. He's had this word planted in his heart for a long time, and it's been cultivated over the years, and he's seen Christian goodwill expressed to him, and he's finally come to a maturity of faith where he's responded. And that's what we see in these stories that John is telling us, that faith has a starting place and continues to grow and mature. We have 3 interviews that we've seen so far. 3 interviews, 3 examples of faith. We have this intellectual rabbi who seeks Jesus named Nicodemus. And then we have this immoral, hardened woman who's there at the well. And then we have this desperate father. Now, with Nicodemus, we have an open-ended discussion. John 3 does not tell us whether Nicodemus ever came to faith at all. And yet we know that he did, because as John continues, Nicodemus comes up in chapter 7. There are some officials that hear Jesus talk, some officers of the court, and they hear Jesus. And when they come back to the Pharisees says, well, why didn't you arrest him? And the officers answered, never has a man spoken the way this man speaks. The Pharisees then answered them, you have not also been led astray, have you? No, one of the rulers of our Pharisees has believed in him, has he? But this crowd which does not know the law is accursed. Notice this, verse 50. Nicodemus, he who came to him before, being one of them, said to them, our law does not judge a man unless it first hears him and knows what he is what he's doing, does it? Nicodemus stands up. He said, well, wait a minute. Let's not be too hasty. Let's at least listen to what he has to say. You see, Nicodemus has grown in his faith from a guy who would seek Jesus in the middle of the night to somebody who now stands up and tries to say, we at least need to listen to him. And then we see Nicodemus one more time in John the 19th chapter in verse 39. It says, Nicodemus, who had first come to him by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. There, as Jesus is being taken down from the cross, Nicodemus is one of those men who helped take Jesus from the cross and prepare him for his burial. You see his growth in faith as he continues through the story. I mean, the woman that we looked at last week, you see the same kind of growth in her faith as well. For instance, verse 9, she says to Jesus, you're a Jew. That's all Jesus is to her is a Jew. He's a male, he's a Jew, that's all she sees in him. And then in verse 12, she says, you're not greater than our father Jacob, are you? Well, maybe there's a little bit more to this guy than just a Jewish male. And then she says in verse 15, Sir, Lord. And then in verse 19, Sir, I perceive you're a prophet. And now he's a prophet. And then in verse 29, she goes, this is not the Christ, is it? I mean, you could see her faith growing from here's just a guy to now he's more than just a man to there he is the Christ. You see her faith growing. And in this desperate father, we see his faith growing too. Jesus is somebody that he can go to in desperation. To the point where Jesus is someone I should obey. I should go and do what he says. To the third thing is, this is the real thing. I now know that he is really the Christ. We see this movement of faith. And that's what John wants us to have, is this better understanding of faith. I don't know where your faith is today. But I hope it's growing. I hope it's maturing. I hope it's getting fuller as we move along. And there's a second thing that happens in these stories I want you to notice as well. This is just the second miracle we have recorded in the Gospel of John. Both these miracles happen in Cana. But they reveal something to us about Jesus. There are only 7 miracles in the Gospel of John, and then we have the resurrection, of course, as well. But these 7 miracles, why does he only give us these 7 miracles? Because each one of these 7 miracles tells us something about Jesus. For instance, the first miracle, turning the water to wine. How do you make wine? Well, you have to go out and plant. You have to plant grapes. Then you have to harvest those grapes when they become to maturity. Then you have to crush those grapes. And then you have to aid them in their fermentation. And then you finally will have wine. Jesus elapses all that time. He is the master of time. Time is nothing to Jesus, and he is the master of quality. We see time and quality, those things that Jesus is master of in that miracle. Here in our miracle today, Jesus is master of space and distance. He doesn't have to be in our presence to do a miracle or to change our lives. And isn't that wonderful? Because we have the faith to pray. He can respond from heaven. Not only can he respond to us from heaven, but he can respond to those who we love who are somewhere else. My younger brother right now is going through cancer, and it's gone into his brain. And I can pray to God for my brother who's down in California, and God can answer, because that's what's shown in this story, that Jesus is the master of space and distance. And the next miracle we'll see is in John 5, where this man who's been sick for 38 years comes to Jesus, and we see the hopelessness. And we see his lack of accountability, but Jesus can overcome all those things as well. And then in chapter 4, the feeding of the 5,000, which is the only miracle that is in all of the Gospels, all 4 Gospels. And Jesus there is able to show his mastery over quantity. He's able to feed all those. Chapter 6, he walks on water, his mastery over natural law. In John 9, there's a man born blind, and he's able to overcome this misfortune. And then in chapter 11, the last miracle is Lazarus. And he raises Lazarus from the dead. He's master over death. See, all these aspects that we see of Jesus are things that we struggle with. We struggle with time. I knew I was going to get old. I just didn't know it was going to happen so fast. And we struggle with time. We struggle with quality. We want the quality of life. We struggle with space and distance. We still have to walk somewhere, travel somewhere, drive somewhere, fly somewhere, but we still have distance. We still have hopelessness. We still lack accountability. We still want quantity. We still have natural laws that we have to deal with. We have misfortune and we have death. And Jesus is Lord of them all. Now, what we see here is John is trying to explain to us 2 things. He's trying to talk to us about what faith looks like and what Jesus is and who Jesus is. And these 2 things are linked together. You really can't have faith at all until you see who Jesus is and what he means to us. We don't have faith in the story of John, by the way. John is just telling us, he's just recording what actually happened. It's the event itself that we believe in, not the records of the event. Sometimes we come to the Bible like we'd go to a museum. You go to the museum and you see old things from the past. You see dusty old relics that are telling a story from the past. And we often come to the Bible the same way, like we'd come to a museum. We're just looking at the dusty past, something that happened already. But the actual event that's being recorded here is not just something that happened in the past, but it tells us that Jesus is alive and he's living today. It's something that happens today. It's happening right now. Jesus is alive. Jesus is not the hero at the end of a story. He's not the founder of a great religion. Jesus is alive. He is the Christ, the Son of God. That's what John wants us to know. That's what John wants us to see. Let me tell you, this nobleman's son, is dead. This nobleman's son eventually died. Lazarus is dead. God has seen me through a lot. But there'll be a final battle that I will fight, and then I too will be dead. And unless Jesus comes again, all of us will die. And some people say, well, where was God? Why did God allow my grandmother to die? Why did he allow my husband, my daughter, my whoever? Why did he allow that to happen? Why did he allow this to take place? Why didn't he do something about it? Well, he did. He allowed us to know that we don't die spiritually, just physically. And he's prepared a place for us. That we have the faith that we will rise again as Jesus rose again. That we'll be with him for eternity. That is the story of faith. That's the story that John wants us to believe. And as we go through these stories and we go through these interviews, what we see is our faith grows to the point where we're living our life. Who we become is somebody who knows we're going to die. That's okay, because we're going to live again. We're people who can grow in our faith. So where is your faith? If it's just as tiny as a mustard seed, don't give up. Just keep maturing in your faith and understanding who Jesus is and understand what he's trying to do for us and have faith in him. And that faith is not a faith that will be in vain. Well, I hope that is an encouragement to us all today. It's good to see everybody. I hope you have a great day and a wonderful week.